text came in at 6:47 on a Friday evening when I was standing in my kitchen still wearing my work badge, too tired to take it off. My brother's name on the screen. I assumed it was something about the holidays. It wasn't. You're not invited to mom and dad's anniversary party. We all agreed. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I read it twice, then a third time. Then I set my phone face down on the counter the way you put something down when you're afraid of what you might do with it in your hands. My parents had been married for 35 years. I'd been planning to drive 6 hours to get there. I had already requested the day off work. A second message arrived before I had moved. You always make everything about yourself. This is their day. Just stay home. That one was from my sister-in-law. She had never liked me, but she had always been careful about it. That message was not careful. That message was someone who no longer felt the need to be. I thought about calling my mother. I thought about it for a long time, standing there in my kitchen with the overhead light doing nothing kind for the room. Then I decided not to. Not yet. Something felt wrong in a way I couldn't name, and I had learned, slowly and at some cost, that when something feels wrong in a way you can't name, you should wait until you can name it before you open your mouth. I texted my brother back one word. Understood. Then I went to bed at 8:30 on a Friday night and, to my own surprise, slept until morning. I should tell you something about who I am before I tell you what happened next, because the rest of it won't make sense without it. I am 31 years old. I work as a forensic accountant for a mid-sized firm in Columbus, Ohio. I've worked there for 6 years. Before that, I put myself through Ohio State on a combination of academic scholarships and weekend shifts at a hotel front desk, a job I took because it paid slightly better than retail and because the overnight hours left my days free for studying. I graduated with honors. I took the CPA exam on my first attempt. I have a one-bedroom apartment, a 7-year-old car I own outright, and approximately $40,000 in savings that I have built by spending less than I earn, month after month, for years. None of that happened because anyone handed it to me. I want to be clear about that. My brother is 4 years older than me. He sells insurance. He has sold insurance for 11 years, for 4 different companies, and at each one the story has been roughly the same. Strong start, rising numbers, then something goes sideways, then a new company. He has a house in the suburbs of Columbus, a wife named Brittany who manages his schedule and his image and his resentments with equal efficiency, and 2 kids I love in the uncomplicated way you love children who haven't done anything to you yet. My parents live in Dayton. My father worked 30 years for a packaging plant before it closed, and my mother taught 2nd grade until her knees gave out. They're good people in the way that a lot of people are good, meaning they tried, and they loved what they understood and what they didn't understand. They sometimes handled badly. What they understood was my brother. He was the one who stayed near home. He was the one who showed up to things, who called on Sundays, who sat with my father watching football and knew every name on the roster. I left at 18. I came back for Christmas and for the occasional long weekend, but I built my life somewhere else, in the direction that felt possible to me. And I think my family experienced that as a kind of abandonment, even though I never thought of it that way. I thought of it as growing. They thought of it as leaving. The gap between us widened in the way those things do. Not dramatically, not with a fight or a rupture, just steadily, the way water finds its way through limestone. You don't notice until the shape has already changed. I noticed it most at family dinners, the way conversation formed around my brother, the way my mother retold his stories as though she had been there, the way my father asked him questions and waited for my opinions only when he had run out of other things to say. I had stopped expecting to be included in the center of those conversations, and I want to be honest. That adjustment had cost me something. It had cost me quietly, over years, and I had paid it because I didn't see another option. What I didn't understand, not yet, was that the exclusion had a purpose, that it wasn't just favoritism, that something was being protected. The first sign came 3 weeks before the text message arrived. I was reviewing a personal credit report. I do this every year, a habit I picked up from work. And I found an inquiry I didn't recognize. A lender in Columbus I had never heard of, pulling my credit file 14 months earlier. I marked it and kept going, the way you do when you see something that might be nothing. But it nagged at me. I went back to it the following weekend. The inquiry was tied to a business credit application. The lender was a company that specialized in small business loans. I had never applied for a small business loan. I had never applied for anything through that lender. I called the number on the inquiry. They asked for my social security number to pull up the file. I gave it. There was a pause. "Ma'am," the woman said, "you are listed as a co-signer on a loan originated 14 months ago. The primary borrower is a business called Northgate Insurance Solutions, LLC. I had never heard of Northgate Insurance Solutions, LLC. I had never heard of Northgate Insurance Solutions, LLC. I said so. Another pause. "The loan is currently past due," she said. "We have been sending notices to the address on file." I asked for the address on file. It was my parents' house in Dayton. I got off the phone and sat very still for a few minutes. Outside my window, Columbus was doing what Columbus does on a Saturday afternoon in October. Gray sky, people walking dogs, a couple arguing quietly at the crosswalk below. Ordinary. Everything ordinary. I knew the name of the primary borrower. I just needed to confirm it. Northgate Insurance Solutions was my brother's company. He had started it 2 years earlier, when his last employer let him go. I hadn't known much about it. He didn't talk to me about his work, and I didn't ask. But I had known it existed. My parents had mentioned it with the particular pride they reserve for anything he did. I had not known my name was attached to it. I did not call my brother. I did not call my parents. I opened my laptop and requested copies of everything that lender had on file for me. The documents arrived by email 3 days later, and I took a personal day from work to read them at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee I kept forgetting to drink. The co-signer agreement had my name on it, my social security number, my address, the Dayton address, not my Columbus apartment, which was itself a small deliberate choice someone had made, and at the bottom, a signature. My name, in handwriting I did not recognize as my own, not even close. I am a forensic accountant. I spend my professional life looking at documents and finding the places where numbers don't add up, where signatures don't match, where something that looks legitimate has been built on an assumption that no one would look closely. I looked closely. The signature was not mine. Someone had practiced it. You could tell by the consistency, the way forgers achieve a kind of flatness that real signatures don't have. But it was not mine. I thought about my brother. I thought about Brittany. I thought about my parents' address on the application, which meant someone had arranged for all correspondence to go somewhere I would never see it. I thought about the past due notice the lender had mentioned, which had presumably been arriving at my parents' house for months. And I thought about the text message. "You're not invited to Mom and Dad's anniversary party." The timing had never made sense to me. My brother and I were not close, but we were not enemies. There had been no fight, no incident. Nothing that explained the sudden formality of that exclusion. But if the loan was past due, if the business was in trouble, then the timing made a different kind of sense. Keep me away. Make sure I stay distant. Make sure I have no reason to talk to anyone in that house. Because if I talk to anyone in that house, I might find out about the notices. I got another cup of coffee. I sat down again. I started making a list. The loan was for $85,000. It had been originated 14 months ago. 14 months of payments, and the account was past due, which meant either the business wasn't generating enough to cover it, or my brother had stopped paying, or both. If the lender moved to collect, they would come after the co-signer. They would come after me. I was not going to let that happen. I called a consumer rights attorney the next morning. Her name was Michelle, a referral from a colleague, and she had the specific kind of unhurried competence that signals someone who has seen this situation before. I emailed her the documents. She called me back the same afternoon. "The signature is fraudulent," she said. "That's clear from a basic comparison. The more important question right now is where the account stands and what the lender is planning to do next." She contacted the lender on my behalf. What she learned was not good. The loan was 4 months past due. The lender had already sent a notice of default to the Dayton address, my parents' house, and had received no response. They were preparing to escalate. As the listed co-signer, I was their next contact. Michelle filed a formal dispute on my behalf. Fraudulent co-signer, forged signature, documentation to follow. The lender put a hold on collection activity while they investigated. That bought us some time. Not much. I had a choice to make and I sat with it for a week. I could go to the police. I could call my parents and give them the chance to explain something that had no explanation. I could do nothing and hope the dispute resolved itself quietly. Or I could do what I knew how to do, build a complete picture before I took any action, so that when I acted, it would be decisive. I chose the last one. It took me 2 weeks, working evenings and weekends. I pulled everything I could find on Northgate Insurance Solutions, business registration records, which are public in Ohio. The registered agent was my brother. The address was his house. The business had been incorporated 22 months ago, right around the time he left his previous employer. There were 2 other financing arrangements I found through public records, a smaller equipment line and a business credit card, neither of which listed me. The loan I was attached to was the largest, and it was the one in default. I found no record of significant revenue. I found overhead. I found the registered agent filings going current each year, which costs $45 in Ohio and tells you nothing about whether a company is actually operating. What I found when I looked at the shape of everything was a business that had been sustained by borrowed money and was now, without new borrowed money, unsustainable. My brother had used my name to borrow the money he needed to keep going. He had forged my signature. He had sent the documents to my parents' house so I would never see them. And then, when the account went into default and my name was about to become a liability, he had disinvited me for my parents' anniversary party. You always make everything about yourself. I read that text message again. I thought about what it would have cost me a few years earlier to receive that message. The self-doubt it would have planted. The question of whether I had done something wrong, whether I was, in fact, too distant, too independent, too much. I had spent years wondering if the emotional temperature of my family was somehow my fault. Now I understood that the emotional temperature had been calibrated, keeping me just close enough to seem like family, just far enough that I wouldn't look at things too closely. It wasn't negligence. It was management. I thought about calling my mother. I had thought about it every day for 3 weeks. She was not a bad person. I did not believe she had forged anything or organized anything. But she had received those past due notices. She had not called me. She had let it happen. That was its own kind of answer. Michelle filed the formal fraud complaint with the lender in the 3rd week of November. It included handwriting analysis from a document examiner. Michelle had arranged this as part of the dispute, along with a sworn statement from me and a demand that my name be removed from all loan documents immediately. The lender suspended the account pending their own investigation. Within 72 hours, they had verified enough to proceed. My name was formally removed as cosigner. The debt reverted entirely to my brother as the primary obligor. My phone started ringing that same evening. My brother called 4 times in 2 hours. I did not answer. He left a voicemail on the second call. What did you do? Call me back. Not a question. A statement delivered in the voice of someone who was frightened and trying to sound angry instead. My sister-in-law called once. She did not leave a message. My mother called at 9 o'clock at night. I picked up because it was my mother, and because there's some habits that don't break cleanly even when you know they should. She didn't start with an explanation. She started with, "He's in trouble, sweetheart." I said, "I know." She said, "We didn't think you'd ever find out. He was going to fix it before." I said, "Mom, just that." And she stopped. There was a silence. A long one. I could hear the television in the background, my father's evening news program, ordinary evening sounds, a life proceeding normally in a house where my name had been attached to a fraudulent loan for over a year. "I got the notices," she finally said. "I didn't know what to do with them. I thought he would handle it. Did you know he forged my signature?" Another silence. "I didn't want to know," she said, which was not the same as no. I told her I had to go. I told her I would call when I was ready to talk more. Then I put my phone face down on the counter in the same spot I had put it after my brother's first text message, and I stood in my kitchen for a while in the quiet. What I felt was not triumph. I want to be precise about that. Triumph would have required something to celebrate, and the thing I had just confirmed was not something I wanted to celebrate. My brother had committed fraud, my mother had known or had made a deliberate choice not to know, which is a particular kind of knowing. My father might or might not have been aware. The business was going to fail anyway now. The removal of the cosigner would accelerate the lender's timeline, and without outside intervention, There was no path forward for Norgate Insurance Solutions. I had done the correct thing. I was certain of that. But the correct thing and the easy thing are not the same. And standing in that kitchen, I felt the weight of the difference between them. My brother's next call came 2 days later, at 7 in the morning. This time, I answered. He started with blame. I had sabotaged him. I had gone behind his back. I had never supported him, never helped, had always been too caught up in my own career to think about family. He was 3 minutes into this before I said his name. He stopped. I know what you did, I said. I have the documents. I have the handwriting analysis. I have the application with an address chosen specifically so I would never receive the correspondence. I know everything. Silence. You forged my signature on an $85,000 loan. That's a felony in Ohio. I had looked this up. It was, in fact, a felony. I am not going to pretend otherwise, and I am not going to absorb the debt you created using my name. His voice, when it came back, was different. Smaller. I was going to pay it back. I just needed more time. You had 14 months. The market shifted. I had clients lined up, and then, I believe you believe that, I said. I don't think that's the point. He asked me what I was going to do. He asked it the way people ask when they want to know how afraid they should be. I told him I had already done it. I had removed my name from the loan. What happened next between him and the lender was between him and the lender. I had no intention of going to the police, not because what he had done was acceptable, but because involving law enforcement in my own family was a threshold I wasn't ready to cross, and I wanted to be honest about my reasoning. But don't, I said, ever use my name again. For anything. Not a reference, not a contact, not a form. Nothing, he said he understood. He didn't apologize. I hadn't expected him to. 3 weeks later, my parents called to ask if I would contribute to a loan to help him pay off the lender before legal proceedings began. The amount they mentioned was $40,000. I said no. My mother started to explain why it would matter, why it would help, why it was family. I let her finish. Then I said, I've been building my savings for years. Carefully, without anyone's help. What's in my account is there because I chose not to spend it, over and over, and situations where spending it would have been easy. I am not going to give it to cover a debt that was created using my name without my consent. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, He's your brother. Yes, I said. He is. That's why this hurts. The call ended shortly after. Not badly exactly, but with a particular heaviness of something that has been said that cannot be unsaid. My brother's business closed in January. The lender filed for judgment. It was a civil matter. In the end, the lender chose not to pursue criminal charges, which was their decision to make. My brother and his wife spent several months working through the financial fallout. I heard about this secondhand, from my mother. In brief updates she offered carefully, as though testing whether I wanted to hear them. I did and I didn't. I listened. I didn't comment. What I noticed over those months was that my parents began calling more. Not about my brother. They learned quickly that I would listen and not engage on that topic, but just to talk. My father asked about my work. My mother asked about my apartment, whether I had painted the bedroom the color I had mentioned once in passing. They were recalibrating, slowly, the way people do when they realize the terms they had been operating under were not the only available terms. In February, my father drove to Columbus on a Saturday. He didn't tell me he was coming until he was already an hour out. He took me to lunch at a diner I liked, and he sat across from me over a grilled cheese and coffee, and he said, I knew about the notices. I want you to know I knew. I nodded. I had suspected. I didn't read them carefully, he said. I think I didn't want to, but I knew something wasn't right and I let it go, and that wasn't fair to you. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was telling me the truth, which was a different thing, and a harder one. I appreciated the distinction. Okay, I said. Okay. Yeah, Dad? Okay. He picked up his coffee. We talked about other things for the rest of the meal. When he left, he hugged me in the parking lot for longer than usual, and I let him. And when I drove home, I felt something ease in my chest that had been tight for longer than I could exactly account for. My brother and I did not speak for 4 months. When we did, it was at Easter. At my parents' house, in the presence of both families, in the polite and careful way of people who have a shared history, they are deciding how to carry. His kids ran around the yard in the April cold, and my mother fussed over the ham, and my father watched the Masters tournament at a low volume in the other room. My brother and I ate at the same table and passed things to each other and did not have the conversation we would eventually have to have. That conversation came in June, on a phone call I initiated. I told him I was not holding what he had done over him. I told him I expected him never to do anything like it again. I told him that if he was ever in real financial trouble, he could call me and we could talk about it openly as adults, and I would not promise help, but I would promise honesty. He said he was sorry. He said it in the flat, uncomfortable way of someone who means it but doesn't know how to carry the weight of it yet. I believed him. I also believed it would take him a long time to understand fully what he had done, and that I could not do that understanding for him. All right, I said. Let's start there. There is a version of the story where I come out of it having learned something clean and complete, where the lesson announces itself and I receive it, and everything resolves into a shape that feels earned. That's not quite what happened. What happened was messier and slower and more human. My brother is still my brother. My parents are still my parents. The house in Dayton still has the same carpet it had when I was 8 years old, and the same smell in the kitchen and the same framed school photos on the hallway wall, including mine. All the way back to kindergarten with the collar too tight and the expression of someone who has been told to smile. What changed was smaller than a lesson and larger than a detail. I stopped waiting for my family to see me the way I needed to be seen, and I started seeing myself that way instead. I had always been careful with money because I'd had to be. I had always been precise because I'd had to be. I had built something reliable out of nothing reliable, and for years I had done it without anyone watching, without anyone saying, "Look at what you built." I looked at it myself. I looked at the account balance and the apartment and the years of work that had gotten me there, and I let it be enough that I knew. The savings account is still there, $40,000, and then some, because I kept adding to it even after all of it, month after month, the same way I always had. Not because I'm trying to prove anything anymore, because it's mine, and it will stay mine, and no one gets to sign their name next to it without my permission. I know how to check.